The warm days and cold nights of spring here in the UP mean the sap is running. We'll talk to a family that's been turning that sap into syrup for over 130 years.
Our syrup business here started in 1885. I'm the 5th generation to run it, me and my wife, Karen. It's been in our family for so long, and just to keep the tradition going means a lot to me.
9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors. The Jasper Sugar Bush in Kearney to find out how UP maple syrup is made on a large scale.
Basically, our syrup business here started in 1885. I'm the 5th generation to run it, me and my wife, Karen. The first year, as far as I know, they made 3 gallons of syrup. We've had buckets since we started till 6 years ago. We put in a full pipeline system, which saved a lot on labor, and it also increased our production by about twice just having the vacuum on there. We tap 15,500 trees. It's all set up on pipeline. We have 3 separate woods. They all pump back to our sap house where we cook the syrup down. We kind of watch a 10-day forecast when we decide to tap. Once we see that 10th day looks like it's going to run, we kind of get out there, get going, get everything tapped up. You got to make sure when you tap that you're not tapping in a previous area where there was a hole. We always say 2 inches on each side of it and 4 inches up above it and below it. You don't want to tap in that area. It gives the tree a chance to heal up. If it's a 8-inch tree, normally you'll put 1 in it. A 16-inch tree, we'll put 2 taps in it. A 24-inch tree, we'll put 3 taps in it. And then some of the really great big trees, we'll put 4 in it, but we don't have a lot of them either. So this is a 5/16 line here. This is all our small line. We basically have everything flowing downhill. This is the end that goes into the tree. We replace this end every year. There's a little ball valve in there that when we shut the vacuum off, that ball valve goes back. So bacteria can't get it into the tree. Once the bacteria gets in there, it basically closes up. So you can hear the vacuum on there, see the sap coming out. We drill that about 1.25 inches into the tree, and then we keep it on a 5-degree angle so that the sap flows down and out. When we tap, we have roughly 6 drills going, and it takes us 3 or 4 days to tap. This year we were tapped in 3 days. That's about the quickest we've ever been tapped, but 2 guys go together. Basically, the one guy drills and the other guy taps the ends in. They both check for any leaks that they can find visually and fix them as they go. We have 2 or 3 guys that basically work all season, checking for leaks, cooking, taking care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Basically, everything that we have is gravity. We have a couple spots in the woods that are lower, so we have lift tanks on them. There's a canister. Once that canister fills up with sap, it shuts the vacuum off and it pumps the sap up and it drains downhill. So basically from the 5/16 lines, it goes into a saddle here, which there's a 5/16 line drilled into the main line here. This is a 3/4 inch line it goes into, and each 3/4 inch line can hold roughly 300 to 500 trees. From this 3/4 inch line, it'll come over to this, we call it dual lines, where basically these run throughout the whole entire woods, and everything branches off of these 2 lines. The top one only holds vacuum. Unless it's running really good, then we have some sap in there too. And the bottom one, you can see the sap going through there. The bottom one is just carries sap. So, and this is all gravity too, but there's also 20 pounds of vacuum on it. So basically if the vacuum would shut down, it would still flow to the lowest point where we pump it out back to the sap house.
Yes, it's that simple. Find out more about Cooking Wild Seasonings at cookingwildseasonings.com.
Then throughout the woods, on every single manifold, we have a vacuum gauge, which lets us know what our vacuum is at that point. We're losing vacuum in that area, and we can go find our leaks on that line. Basically, the sap runs into this vacuum canister, and then it runs down into this sap tank here. And once it hits a certain level, this float will kick it off, and then that pump pumps it back to the sap house. Every time it pumps over, it probably pumps 2-3 gallons over. All our lines are 2-inch lines that run underground back to the sap house. Our other woods over there, we have a 3 horsepower pump that pumps it back over there. That runs 3/4 of a mile through the field and under the road. It's buried roughly 6 to 8 feet underground. So the sap is basically sucked up through the roots. It wants to get up to the buds to make the buds. So it runs between the bark and the wood and into the wood a little ways. So as it's going up to go to the buds, it hits that hole and we basically suck it out of there. We keep at least 20 pounds of vacuum on it. Basically what we're looking for to get a good run is for it to freeze at night and get above freezing during the day. For some reason, a northwest wind is always good. Any real northern wind is good for some reason. At the beginning of the season, if the ground isn't froze, it's hard to get a real good run, but once the ground unthaws, it seems like it runs a lot better. Season could be anywhere from 2 weeks to, we've had it up to 6 weeks already. As long as the temperature keeps where it's supposed to be, it could be up to maybe even 2 months. Once it warms up and you're not getting freezing at night and you got about a week of that, the trees will bud out. And as soon as they bud out, then the sap goes to a real bad flavor and you know it right away. It's harder to cook. It gets really foamy. Once we concentrate it, it's really cloudy. It messes up our filters real bad, plugs them up. Some of the problems that we have is just mainly trees falling down on the line and squirrel damage. Out of 15,500 taps, I would guess that we fix between 200 and 400 squirrel damage leaks a year. They see that fluid in the lines and then they basically chew through the lines, and we figure we got roughly 80 miles of pipeline out. So it's a big job to fix all them leaks. Another big problem we might have is if we don't suck all the sap out when it's about to freeze, the sap can collect in these manifolds and it pretty much breaks them all apart. And then the next day when you go to fire everything up, you have no vacuum because their manifolds broke all over the place. So some spots we have, they're not real good to be set up on a gas pump or a electric vacuum pump. So we just have little gravity systems. This one holds about 80 trees. Basically everything flows downhill and into this tank. It works really good because there ain't nothing we gotta do with it except let the sap go in there, and then we bring it back to the sugar bush and dump her out. We still do tap a few buckets. I think it's kind of just keeps the tradition going, and I guess we always determine how good it's running by how the tree's dripping. So we always have a few of them tapped just as a visual for us anyways. And you can see there's a chunk of ice in there. It's pure water, so it brings up the sugar content in there. A lot of guys that do buckets take that big chunk of ice out and their sap could test 3 or 4% sugar content. So it's kind of a good way if you got buckets to bring your sugar content up. So this is one of our vacuum pump houses. We have 2 big vacuum pumps in there. Every time it pumps over, it's pumping at least 450 gallons over there. This is the woods where my great-great-grandpa started. Some of these trees, some of these great big trees in here, they used to tap back then 130 years ago, and we're still tapping today. Right up over there is where they used to cook the sap. They would bring the sap here and basically just had a little lean-to so they could go underneath and get out of the weather, I guess, and keep the snow off of everything. I imagine they started like everybody else probably starts, with a small 4x6 pan or whatever and a small fire underneath it, and just sit around and boiling it up, you know. Basically all 15,500 trees that come in here go into them big 2 white big tanks there. From there we process it through our reverse osmosis machines. They take off 75% of the water. It makes a lot lighter syrup when you don't have to boil it as much. These 2 tanks here are concentrate tanks, and this is just a water tank which we take off the trees. Every time we wash the ROs and rinse them, it takes 600 gallons of water, so we basically use the water that we take out of the trees and wash the equipment with it. When we get it in, it tests roughly 1.6 sugar content, maybe to 2, and when it's in this pan, it's between 8 and 10% sugar content. This is a reverse osmosis machine. Like I said, it takes off 75% of the water roughly. It goes through a 5-micron filter before it goes through here. These are the 5-micron filters it goes through. Basically, the sap goes into this on the outside and it gets sucked in through the center of it. It also goes through an ultraviolet light, which kills 99% of the bacteria that's in it. We have two membranes in there, and it pushes so much pressure through that only the water molecules can pass through the membrane, and the sugar molecules stay behind and get washed out to our concentrate tank.
Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom. I started hunting when I was just a kid, sitting on a stump next to my dad. When I was 14, he bought me this rifle. So it's not just a gun, it's special. Sometime after he passed away, I had this knife custom made. The leather in the handle is from a belt he wore for years. So it's not just a knife.
This top pan here is where it comes from after it's out of this holding tank. It's called a steam away pan. There's basically tubes that run through it, and we force air through them tubes to make a bigger surface area for the sap to heat up. This pan is ran by the pan below, by the steam that comes off the pan below to heat up the sap. The steam away pan creates a lot of steam water that comes off it, and we use that right here to sterilize all our barrels. The water comes off at over 200 degrees, so it sterilizes the barrel. We'll basically dump the barrel out so we have a perfectly clean, sterile barrel when we go to fill it. From the steam away pan, it goes down to the deep flue pan, and that's kept on a float, so we keep a certain level in there at all times. The deep flue pan is basically shaped like a big V. It has a lot of surface area to heat up the sap. That pan in the back is called the deep flue pan. We have air forced up through the fire, and it's pushed back through that deep flue pan. And there's just a lot of surface area for the sap to heat up, and it starts boiling back there. We cut all the wood off our own land here, which keeps our woods nice and clean. If you go through our woods, you'll see there's no dead stuff laying around. We burn roughly 20 to 30 cords to boil up all our syrup every year. So try to get smaller wood, dry wood, because it burns faster, burns hotter. The hotter fire you have, the lighter your syrup is going to be. We keep enough dry, small wood to make the syrup as light as we can. One other thing is when we stoke our fire up, we do it every 15 minutes. So we really go through a lot of wood like that, but it keeps a nice hot fire in there. This is our finishing pan here. Basically, there's 6 places where it can boil in here. It starts out, it goes just like a snake. It'll start from the back there, and it just goes around through a loop. And as it gets further and further, it gets closer and closer to syrup. This is an automatic draw-off system. So once it hits predetermined temperature, whatever we decide, it'll automatically come off. The temperature can vary anywhere from 2 degrees. We check it with this hydrometer. To test the syrup, we put the syrup in the hydrometer canister here. We check it about every 15 minutes. And this is just right below syrup because it's right before where we're taking it off. And once it hits that red mark there, it's syrup. So you can see how close that is to syrup there. We're like 2 bricks away. Depending on whether it's gonna rain out or whatever, it will change. So we constantly adjust our temperature to make sure it's coming off right at syrup. It's really neat because basically, I mean, we can be standing here cooking, and 2 miles away out in the woods, a tree can be dripping and it ends up coming out of that chute right there. And that's all we have to do is make sure our pumps are working right, make sure our RO's working right, and we keep our fire stoked, and the syrup will keep coming out. So then from here, we run it through our filter press. This is a double bay 10-inch filter press, which we run with a air pump. Every 100 to 135 gallons of syrup that we run through there, this will be a solid block of sand in here. And this is the sand that we take out of there, which makes it so that syrup is just crystal clear and there's no impurities in it. From there, we put it in our 55-gallon drums, or we have 40-gallon stainless steel drums that we use also. Every barrel of syrup that we make, we take a little cylinder like this out of the barrel from about the middle of the barrel, so we know what kind of syrup is in that barrel. So if somebody wants to buy a barrel, they can see what kind of syrup they're getting. We have 3 different grades. This is light syrup, which we're making right now. That's medium syrup, which you can see it's a little bit darker. And then we have like dark grade B syrup. That's how we grade our syrup. Yeah, a lot of people prefer light syrup for like on pancakes. The darker grade B syrup, which people say it has more flavor, is better for like baking. Some people just prefer the dark syrup because it's got a lot a lot more maple flavor. It's a little stronger flavor. As we need it throughout the year, we bottle it up at the house. This is a syrup that we made this year. We heat it up on this finishing pan. We heat it back up to 180 to 200 degrees. There's a pipe that goes through the wall there, and then we bottle it in the other room. We have plastic containers and glass containers. We also make maple candy, maple sugar, maple cream. This is like maple sprinkles. I think one thing I like about making syrup is that I know that my family's done this for a long time, and I tell you what, when people get our syrup, they tell us there's no other syrup like it. I don't know if that's the truth or not, or if they're just trying to be nice to me, but it's nice hearing positive things about what we make here, and that it actually makes people happy to buy it. It's a lot of work this time of year, but it's just a nice thing to do. It gets you out of the house after having cabin fever all winter, you know, so it's been in our family for so long, and just to keep the tradition going means a lot to me.
906 Outdoors is brought to you in part by the Island Resort and Casino.
Experience championship golf at Sweetgrass, rated as one of the best courses you can play in Michigan. And at Sage Run, ranked number 4 on Golf Digest's list of America's best new courses. Sweetgrass and Sage Run, dramatically different, but equally exceptional. Casino stay and play packages from just $95. Visit islandresortgolf.com today to plan your championship golf experience. That's islandresortgolf.com.
As Upers, we specialize in making do with what we've got, and we've got firewood. You'd be hard-pressed to find a backyard that isn't adorned with a tarp-covered pile of wood. Whether we realize it or not, it's just one of the ways we live off the land here in the Upper Peninsula. Here's some insight on heating with wood from MSU Extension Agent Bill Cook.
You know, you can talk about which wood to burn, and you can talk about how to stack it and season it, and you can talk about different wood stoves and furnaces and chimneys, and all that's important if you're going to be a steady wood burner. And incidentally, firewood is the cheapest way to go, hands down. But there's a caveat to that, and that's, of course, you got to be willing to do some work. Average home burns about 100 million BTUs in a season. Cord of wood will have roughly 15 to 20 million BTUs, so depending on your house and your furnace and your efficiencies, you know, you're going to need about 5-6 cords of wood to heat a good-sized house. I've been burning firewood a long time, and mostly what I try to use, living in the great North Woods like we do, is hard maple. But there's a lot of good wood out there. Anything that comes out of our northern hardwoods, pretty much you burn, and I'm one of those guys where I pretty much burn anything that I find. We've got even some old pieces of willow sitting here that if you dry it, it's a nice fast burning wood for those spring fires or kindling to get things going. But most of the time it's this hard maple, sugar maple. It's a real common pulpwood. A lot of times you can find loggers who can't necessarily sell it to a mill for one reason or another. The smaller size material makes great firewood. So the species doesn't really matter a whole lot, although you'll find a lot of people argue that point, because wood, pound for pound, has the same amount of BTUs, give or take a small percentage. The difference between different kinds of woods, for example, is the volume. Pound for pound, willow and maple have the same number of BTUs, but maple is a lot denser than willow. So you need more willow by volume to get the same pound or the same ton or the same amount of weight as you would with hard maple. So that's why a lot of people will say you get more bang for your buck with a dense hardwood, a sugar maple or an oak or something along those lines, than you will with willow. But that doesn't mean you can't burn, and that's basically true. There are more BTUs in this piece of wood than there are in this piece of wood, even though they're about the same size. But that's simply because this is denser. But you can burn in a wood stove or a furnace just about anything, as long as you dry it and season it correctly. the moisture content is going to significantly reduce the amount of BTUs that go into your house, because a wet piece of wood is going to burn slower. The heat in the furnace is going to have to drive off that moisture, that water, before it begins to burn the wood. So you're taking a lot of heat and essentially evaporating water instead of using it to heat your house. So dry wood, as dry as you can get it, is good. If you can get wood down to 20% moisture, that's basically air-dried wood, 20%, a little less than 20%. If you've got that, you can burn almost anything. Now there are some woods that you can burn wet because of the wood structure. They carry less water. Ash is notorious for that, at least white ash. You can burn it a little moister than some species. Sugar maple, on the other hand, doesn't burn very well when it's wet, and neither does oak and aspen and willow, and some of those don't burn at all. Some folks will say you can't burn or shouldn't burn conifers like jack pine or balsam fir or tamarack. Well, you can. They do have some extra chemicals in them, and it's even more important to get those well dried and seasoned, because a lot of those chemicals will be driven off during the drying process. But even so, when you do burn them, they are going to put more chemicals into your chimney flue shaft, and that'll have to be cleaned out. If you burn that stuff wet, you're going to get more and more of those accumulations, and that's when you get the possibility of chimney fires. That crud in there, some people call it creosote, which isn't quite right, but the creosote that's in there catches fire. It's very hot, and so your attic starts on fire, your wall, and then disaster strikes. There are a lot of people who do cut wood just before they burn it, and you can't do that. Dead wood, if you cut it, the upper part of the wood is actually drier than the bottom part, but the first 8 to 10 feet of that wood still can conduct water during the growing season, especially the last couple of feet. The butt end of that log or that standing dead tree is still wet. And I would still recommend air drying those to get the most efficiency out of the wood in your furnace or the stove that you're using. You want to keep the house warm, and you want to burn the least amount of wood as possible and minimize the labor that's involved. Let that nice July, August air dry that wood out for you, and that's going to be the trick right there. And I don't stack my wood like this when it's drying in the season. This is my winter stacking. It's pretty tight. I try to fit in as much into the garage as possible. But when I air dry it, I'll stack it real loosely, 2 or 3 at a time, crosswise, to allow lots of air movement in there to dry that wood out. You can see there's lots of air movement through here. It'll move through the pile. The breezes will move through, and then when the sun beats, I pull off the tarps in the summer. And I don't mind it raining on it during the summer, because that's just wood water that's on top of the wood, and it'll actually dry out pretty quickly. As long as that air can move through it, it'll be dry. Of course, most of the time, end of July and August, we don't get much rain anyway. And you get those nice temperatures, 75, 80, 85 degrees. It'll drive most of the moisture out that air is going to drive out. But then come Labor Day or soon after that, I'll cover it all up and keep the fall rains off, and then we're all set to go.